Now today's topic is the post-World War and India. What happened after the World War II? What are the conditions that were at present of the India as soon as India became independent? What were the tough challenges for the new independent nations? What are the solutions for this? What did India do to overcome all these kind of things? But before going into analyzing India's role after India achieved its independence and the post scenario of the world, let us discuss what was the loss or what happened after World War II. In actual numbers, we have seen experience most of the European countries have faced huge losses in their incomes, economies, or in their properties, in their soldiers, all in everything in aspect. Everybody's life has been touched with the effect of World War II. As the calculations move on, see here, aftermath of the World War II, most of the European countries like USSR, Poland and Yugoslavia lost 20% of their entire assets in almost all the fields of economical, political and in the agricultural sector, industrial sector, military bases, military strength, everything. And moving on to especially a case study against USSR, it revealed that in USSR only we found that 1700 towns were destroyed completely. No person was left unturned and almost all were died in 1700 towns. The entire buildings were collapsed. Everything was completely destroyed in 1700 towns of USSR, and nearly 31,000 factories were demolished or stopped working after the World War II came to an end because of the economic losses or because of the lack of the labor or because of the lack of the financial resources for the industries. All these things led 31,000 factories to shut down, which means like most of the people got unemployed because of the shutdown of the factories. And moving on to the villages, nearly 70,000 villages got destroyed in the World War II, either because of the attacks made by the US or because of the Japanese attacks or because of the Hitler's attacks or because of the Italy people coming and attacking them. In all this scenario, the USSR was the main loser in the issue of terms of towns, factories or villages, leaving apart the soldiers, leaving apart the economy, leaving apart the war expenses, whatever has been made. Now moving on to the towns, only 1700 towns means it's not an easy thing. And moving on to factories, 31,000 factories, it is a very difficult task to establish all the factories again, and 70,000 villages could not be done so easily. And in contrary to this, moving on to USA, the USA was a safe zone where the war was not fought on its soil. So the loss or the impact of the World War II on it was very less. Only just 5% of the loss has been incurred. And after the Great Economic Depression, America for the first time during the Second World War got experienced hike in agriculture as well as in their industrial outputs. In agriculture, it started to give the fresh outputs of the crop, and they started to get the huge amount for their support prices for the products what they are producing there. And as the entire world was in war, they need the food, material and everything. It was supplied by USA. They achieved a greater market at that moment of time. And also for the industries, as in most of the European countries, the industries were not functioning properly. USA could utilize this time approximately and timely needs, and it could emerge as a very established strong economy. And in fact, in March 1945, the president of USA at that moment of time, Mr. Harry Truman, also clearly told that because of the Second World War, we emerged into a very strong nation. Ever since in the history happened in such kind of things. So we have to consider here, European countries lost very much because of the Second World War, but when it compared to the USA, USA was a main gainer. Yes, USA also had participated in the Second World War. You also stood against the Hitler, Japan and as well as the Italy dictatorship and all the monarchy system, and they were against the ideals of fascism and Nazism. But the impact of World War II on the economies or on the sustainability or on the towns, factories or the industries was merely very less, except of the Pearl Harbor attack on US land. Remaining any other regions we don't find as it was attacked. This made USA to turn into a very large superpower nation. Yes, in the other side, USSR suffered a very huge amount of loss in terms of towns, factories as well as in their villages also. Now let us see what are the major other developments which have come up because of the Second World War. There are three major developments which have turned the entire world into their attention. Let us see what are these very soon. The major developments which happened after after the Second World War are three major initiatives which were taken for us. The first one is the United Nations, the formation of the United Nations. The world has seen two devastating world wars in which the people of each and every corner of the world and each and every nation of the world realized that we can't go further with the issue of wars. We have to go with the issue of negotiations and to settle any dispute by through peaceful means rather than by involving themselves into a conflict and later into a war. So an international organization has to be set up to settle the disputes peacefully and to create a platform to settle, to make the people to settle down and discuss on the issues rather than fighting for an issue. This was a main basic principle in order to the formation of United Nations, famously known as UN. The next issue which was developed very crucially and dominated the entire scene for the next 46 years was the Cold War. As soon as the World War II came to an end, two new superpowers emerged into the large dominating nations in the world. One is the USA, as we have discussed earlier. USA was the less impacted country of the World War, and most of the finances of USA are stable when compared to the other nations in the Europe. But in the same time, we have another alternative standing on the European side, that is the country of Union of Soviet Socialistic Republic, USSR, short formally known as. Now USSR stood up as the second rising world nation, whereas Britain and France, having their colonies in existence, they could not control them further because most of the army got struck and defeated, and most of the soldiers were not willing to continue there, and even the countries were not in a position to withhold their position as they were in the colonial masters earlier. So the two superpower nations are, one is USA, the other one is USSR. Now the dominant scene is that USA represents the democratic and the capitalistic bloc, whereas USSR represents the socialistic and the communistic bloc. So now, in order to gain their support and to spread their ideologies, the two superpowers started to take initiative and grab the countries or force the countries to follow their ideologies. We have the European bloc supported towards Russia, whereas the democratic setup or the entire independent nations preferring of capitalism would be supported by USA. So this issue has raised the Cold War concept. Cold War is a war which is fought indirectly between two nations. Indirectly in the sense, for example, any two nations are fighting, take A and B are two different nations, A having controversy with B, fighting with each other, then USA would take the side of A and USSR will be automatically supported by the side of B. Then it will be a war fought between A and B for the scenario what we are going to see in the theatre of war. But in the actual context, it is a war which is fought between USA and USSR. This is a scenario of Cold War. This came into the picture after 1945, the Second World War came to end, and it ended up after the disintegration of USSR, where USSR got disintegrated and turned into Russia. Now let us see the other concept which was developed is decolonization. Most of the countries, especially which are under the hold of Britain and France, could not remain further long as colonies, and USA started to negotiate and pressurize the countries of Britain and France to give independence for the colonial masters, give them their lands and give them the independence completely, because till now we can't further hold them longer and we should not be in a principle of dominating them. In order to that, we have to administer them and make them to shine by giving them the necessary instructions or necessary funds for them to develop. In this way, America and USSR start to pressurize the countries of Britain and France, and even they could not hold it longer because their army was in trouble and their navy, they lost everything in the Second World War. Most of them was got struck. So in order to get leveled and free, gradually they started to give independence in the colonial countries by this Second World War period as it comes to end. Now let us see in detail what happened. How did UNO was formed? Is really UNO a successful organization? Who is dominating the UNO's decisions? How are the decisions of UNO were taken? Who will be the in charge of UNO? What are the famous countries in UNO? What are the total number of countries present in UNO? We will discuss all these things just now.